Nietzsche's concept of rank order as a response to neglect of tradition. In the late 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche recognized a crisis of morality that was sweeping across the West and driving men to nihilism. According to Nietzsche, contemporary Europe was beset with a paralysis of will, resulting from the failure of men to live out their professed belief in God. This failure made the contrast between the different ranks of human beings more apparent. As Nietzsche wrote in an unpublished note, "My philosophy aims at an ordering of rank." Through the framework of rank order, Nietzsche portrayed the ongoing conflict over the possession and exercise of power within society generally, and nearly all men in particular. Master morality and slave morality typify the contention by upholding opposite estimations of worth. The former is associated with a proud disposition and honors the firm exertion of power, while the latter corresponds to humility, kindness, and weakness in the face of suffering. In this presentation, I contend that Nietzsche's system of rank order is especially noteworthy for its attempt to fill the metaphysical gap created when society neglected the Christological vision of creation. Of course, as we shall see, Nietzsche didn't consider this abandonment of Christ a form of neglecting the true vision of reality, but rather as a step toward acquiring it. The Christian vision of creation, which reached the heights of theological richness and cultural ubiquity during the Middle Ages, was rooted in strict categories of order. The biblical book of Sirach summarizes how this order came to be. The works of the Lord have existed from the beginning by his creation, and when he made them, he determined their divisions. He arranged his works in an eternal order, and their dominion for all generations. End quote. The 9 choirs of angels are higher than men, while men are higher than animals and inanimate beings. Hence, the ordering of creation was rationally determined prior to human agency and tends toward a permanent state of rule and contentment. Furthermore, this order not only distinguishes creation on a horizontal plane, but on a vertical plane as well, imparting a hierarchical character to this division. In the 4th century, St. Augustine described order as the arrangement of things equal and unequal, allotting to each its own position. 2 centuries later, Pseudo-Dionysius explained that this hierarchical arrangement of all beings is distinguished by 3 marks. A hierarchy is a sacred order, a state of understanding, and an activity approximating as closely as possible to the divine. End quote. A member's participation is directly related to the summit of all hierarchy, God himself, who supernaturally, quote, gives substance and arrangement to everything which exists, end quote, and is thus both its source and goal. Striving to approximate the divine makes the lower members of the hierarchy more like the higher ones, the highest of which is God. As creatures by nature, men cannot achieve this approximation of the divine by their own limited means. For this they require grace, which is mediated to them through the higher members in the hierarchy, who receive it from God as a free gift. In the celestial hierarchy, angels and saints occupy these upper rungs, while bishops and priests do the same in the ecclesiastical hierarchy, according again to the 6th century Pseudo-Dionysius. The higher members exist to serve the lower members, and with their humble cooperation, to raise them up to greater heights of divine participation. Even while these naturally limited creatures ascend to greater unity with God, their natures are not thereby contradicted or obliterated. As St. Thomas Aquinas famously wrote in the 13th century, grace does not destroy nature, but perfects it. His teacher, St. Albert the Great, similarly said that grace builds on nature. So, the Christian tradition presents us with an integrated understanding of all creation in relation to its perfect divine creator. God hierarchically orders it and immediately extends his grace to its members, so as to perfect and elevate nature, especially the nature of man, to abundantly share his supernatural life. This vision contains such beauty, such purpose. What can Nietzsche object to? As it turns out, a lot. So now we turn to Nietzsche's conception of hierarchy. In the notes assembled after his death into a volume entitled The Will to Power, Nietzsche asserts that Christianity constitutes, quote, an extreme immorality and a crime against life, unquote. There are many reasons for this, but a prominent one is Christianity's, quote, enhancement of the egoism of the individual to an extreme, such that all souls became equal before God. But this is precisely the most dangerous of all possible evaluations, end quote. The problem with such egalitarianism, according to Nietzsche, is that it invited all men, even the lowliest, who equally bear the image of God according to Christianity, to sacrifice themselves in pursuit of individual and communal immortality. This was anticipated by David in Psalm 112 of the Old Testament. Who is as the Lord our God, who dwelleth on high, and looketh down on the low things in heaven and in earth, raising up the needy from the earth, and lifting up the poor out of the dunghill, that he may place him with princes, with the princes of his people. In the words of the Gospel of Luke, he hath put down the mighty from their seat, and hath exalted the humble, or as another translation puts it, those of low degree. This invitation ran counter to Nietzsche's conviction that, quote, the species, the human species, requires that the ill-constituted, weak, degenerate perish. But it was precisely to them that Christianity turned as a conserving force. It further enhanced that instinct in the weak, already so powerful, to take care of and preserve themselves and to sustain one another, end quote. Nietzsche's bold statement about the need for weak human beings to be sacrificed is rooted in his understanding of rank order. In his 1886 book, Beyond Good and Evil, he delineates two contrasting moralities comprising contemporary society, based on regularly recurring traits that coalesce into a general division of character. In a moment of philosophical epiphany, he says, two primary types revealed themselves to me, and a radical distinction was brought to light, end quote. He names them master morality and slave morality, to reflect the most basic division of interactions among humans, since, as one scholar relates, he considers, quote, mastery and slavery to be the primal social relations of Western history, end quote. Nietzsche proceeds to outline the primary characteristics of the two types, noting first that they are not always completely distinct within an advanced civilization, and may even share space in the soul of a single man. At the same time, the types are at least capable of being theoretically distinguished for the purpose of analyzing a given individual. The first type, master morality, quote, originated in a ruling caste, unquote, by which he means the portion of the people with significant societal power over others. This group consists of the noble type of man, who is aware of his own power and thus, quote, regards himself as a determiner of values, end quote. He determines values by establishing particular conceptions of good and bad. He regards, quote, the exalted, the proud disposition as the distinguishing feature, whereas the cowardly, the timid, the insignificant, and those thinking merely of narrow utility are despised as bad. In other words, he, quote, honors whatever he recognizes in himself, end quote, and his own nobility becomes the standard of judgment for the entire community. All of these qualities revolve around power, which is precisely what characterizes the morality of the ruling class. In contrast to master morality, Nietzsche describes slave morality as the corresponding type for those who are ruled. He describes them as, quote, the abused, the oppressed, the suffering, the unemancipated, the weary, and those uncertain of themselves. Their understanding of good is based on whatever qualities are useful for alleviating suffering, particularly, quote, sympathy, the kind helping hand, the warm heart, patience, diligence, humility, and friendliness. This condition does not apply to only a small segment of human beings, but the majority of them. As Mark Alfano points out, quote, Nietzsche thinks that almost everyone in modern culture has inherited some degree of psychological slavishness. The distinction between master morality and slave morality is critical for understanding how the new valuation will occur and who will direct it. Already established moral systems must be subordinated to the valuations of the noble, as, quote, moral systems must be compelled, first of all, to bow before the gradations of rank, as Nietzsche says. Only men of the higher rank can play a decisive role in ordering the future of human history, since, quote, it is the peculiar right of masters to create values. This valuation is based entirely on power, since according to Nietzsche, there is nothing to life that has value except the degree of power, assuming that life itself is the will to power. Furthermore, Nietzsche insists that augmenting one's power both internally and externally is necessary to align oneself with the demands of life and the being, capital B, that undergirds it. While some of those of a lower rank are destined to rise to the rank of the noble through the accumulation of power, only what he calls the overman can perfectly summit the peak of power and redeem humanity from its limited arrangement of rank. Such a man, whom Nietzsche also calls the new philosopher, quote, can only arise in conjunction with a ruling caste as its highest spiritualization, end quote, and the fulfillment of rank order. Nietzsche's conception of a human hierarchy based on power stands in sharp contrast to the Christian tradition that preceded him, and grounded order in union with God. Yet, these contrasting visions also bear some resemblance. In place of a divinely ordered hierarchy based on natural and supernatural virtue, he proposed an inevitable natural ordering based on will to power. Both recognize that man has largely inherited a condition of slavery, weakness, and suffering. Christianity identifies sin as the culprit and believes man is powerless to escape its grasp on his own. Suffering is the means by which Christ earned man's salvation, and man can participate in that saving work by uniting his suffering with Christ's and submitting to him in faith. While full attainment of heavenly beatitude entails freedom from material poverty, the same cannot be said of those who are poor in spirit, who are blessed, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. As St. Ambrose interpreted this beatitude, in the eye of heaven, blessedness begins at the point where misery begins in human estimation. And as St. Augustine wrote, the poor in spirit are those not puffed up, not proud, not high-minded. So humility is characteristic of those who are free from slavery to sin and are ascending upward in the hierarchy of being. Nietzsche, by contrast, sees humility and kindness as the marks of man's slavery, which can be overcome through pride and power. In place of a process of growth in virtue and sanctification through conformity to Christ, he suggested certain great human beings can ascend to the rank of master morality and surpass it, attaining maximal power through self-selection. Finally, in place of the saving work of Christ that raises up the lowly, Nietzsche asserted that this highest category of men can save mankind by passing beyond all systems of rank once and for all. Where Christianity offered the weak hope of eternal life, Nietzsche's overman offers them voluntary death, a sacrifice for the good of mankind that supplants Christian idealism. Thereby, as he wrote in The Gay Science, naturalizing with pure, newly discovered, newly redeemed nature. Throughout this system, echoes of the antecedent tradition persist, even as Nietzsche sought to overthrow it through a reevaluation of all values. Perhaps these echoes were deliberate, or perhaps they were inescapable threads of truth that not even nihilism could fully discard, even if it distorted them.